Hello, Simone. I'm excited to be here with you today. This is probably one of the most requested episodes we've ever had. But what are our thoughts on the current H1B visa debate that's going on in the right now? Now, just first, I need to categorize for people's brains which the H1B visa actually is, because there is what we are told the H1B visa is, and then there is what the H1B visa actually is. So for people outside the United States, the H1B visa is the idea that if you have special talents or you're uniquely skilled, companies can bring you over for immigration and sort of fast track your immigration process only if they can prove that they can't find an equivalent person in the United States. What the H1B visa actually is, and this is going to shock you, Simone, is you know how the US used to have like immigration thresholds for different countries where if you were of certain ethnicities, you could get sort of a free pass into the United States or much easier pass into the United States than the existing ethnic mix of the United States.
Right.
The H1B visa is basically that, but for Indian people. 73% of the people who get an H1B visa are Indian.
Whoa, wow. Okay. That's more than I thought.
That's an insane amount if you're like looking at a global stage. It is the and this plays into a lot of resistance that some people have to it. So if you're just people like us and you're like, oh, the competent people, like I don't care if we get a lot of competent immigrants in, and a lot of people are complaining, well, it's not just the competent immigrants, there's a lot of Indian nepotism causing people to come in. So I want to get to that aspect of the debate because I think that there is a level of nuance here. The second thing I'd like to say on all of this is I told you so. So many people, when we were like, okay, believe me, Trump's administration is now the new right. That's who's staffing his offices. That's going to be the policy you're going to see coming out of it. When I talked about the new right, old right split and the JD Vance appointment and it sort of symbolizing Trump going in a new right direction. And I had pointed out many times, I was like, Trump is against low-skilled immigrants. He is for high-skilled immigrants. On the All In podcast, he even went so far as to say he'd give all people who got a college degree in America an automatic citizenship. Now, I think that's going too far, but I am okay if you do that for like the top 2-3 colleges maybe. Now, because it's actually insane. We have the best PhDs like in the world here, and we'll get people to go to Stanford. Like I had a friend from Israel, right? Came over, started a company, it was doing well, and they kicked him out of the country. And I'm like, this company could have been like $1 billion company. What percent of our unicorns are by immigrants? I think it's like 33% of the companies that ended up being over $1 billion in valuation are immigrants.
Amount. Yeah.
Sorry, I was wrong here. It was 55%. So over half of US billion-dollar valuation companies are founded by first-generation immigrants.
Yeah.
It's just stupid to kick out somebody with a Stanford MBA who's starting a company that's already funded. What is wrong with you people? So like broadly, I'm pro this, but the marketing point here that I was like, look, the new right is really in control of the ship now. And a lot of people thought I was blustering or that I was bluffing or that I would like, apparently no, like the H1B visa, that is the most anti-MAGA thing you could have in terms of like the old MAGA, right? But it fits perfectly with the policy of the new right, which is just about efficiency and actually America first, like ensuring that we beat our enemies. And so if it works out well, okay, so now let's get into the actual battle here. Anything you want to say before I go further?
No, keep going. I do have only one hesitation that hit me about H1B visas after I read an Aporia article, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on their arguments, which I will run by you. But let's go over your arguments first.
Oh, hold on. There's something we have to go over before any of this. The Andrian Ditterman fiasco.
Is this a real person's name?
Well, it's funny that you think it sounds like a made-up name. So many people argue that a Twitter account called Andrian Ditterman is a fake account that Elon Musk is using as a sock puppet to support himself, that has said things like, you're a great dad, Elon, and that has regularly tweeted like pro-Elon things. And
does it seem like the kind of person to do a sock puppet account?
Yeah, so the left is memeing about this. I learned about it from like an Advice Animals meme. Unfortunately, from a drama perspective, it's almost certainly not true. One is common sense. If, as Simone said, it's just out of character for him. If you like follow him in any form of a generous fashion, or yeah, he. Can I say he wouldn't do something like that. It just doesn't come off like him. He's sort of like a nerdy dad type. He's not like a desperate for affirmation. In fact, he does a lot of things that are very like going to get him public hate. He more likes shit storming than affirmation. Like he's a troll for trolling's sake in a big way.
I think he likes attention, just like any person typically, but he's not. It takes a very specific type of person to do the sock puppeting thing.
He doesn't care about positive attention, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, well, and he like the kind of person who is capable of who would turn to a sock puppet for affirmation is also the kind of person who doesn't hold themselves to that high of a standard. There are some people who are too proud who would actually want real praise. Like they may pander to praise, they would never use themselves to do that because it needs to be real. Like the lack of honor in fake praise from a sock puppet account that you yourself created would be so humiliating to yourself and your own internal narrative that like you would never do it.
But it also makes no sense. This account had 20,000 followers or whatever a year ago. Now it's at like 100,000 followers.
Huh.
Elon's tweets get like tens of millions of views. Like that he would try to praise himself. And in terms of responses, I would guess the average Elon tweet gets probably, what do you think, 200,000 responses? Like a single response among those would not be enough to matter. Like even on videos as small as ours, we have already reached a size where it wouldn't make sense for me to create a sock puppet because the sock puppet would just like be drowned out by all the legitimate comments and praise. Elon has enough obsequious fanboys that he doesn't need a sock puppet, but also there's hard evidence that it's not Elon, which a lot of people haven't done digging. And so here I'm going to read from a piece by Ketrik Pratap. According to Alistair McPline, he participated in a Twitter Spaces event and heard the voice of Adrian Ditterman, which sounded like Elon Musk's voice modified using modulation software. Yeah?
Just crazy.
But he goes on to say, last year, I joined some of Adrian Ditterman's Twitter Spaces, where he was encouraging people to jump on Elon Musk's tweets as soon as they were posted to boost reach and engagement. So, unfortunately, here we basically have before he, and then he goes, and it was clear that Adrian is not Elon Musk, but that he often made deliberate slips in his conversation to spark controversy and grab attention. These slips seem designed to make people think he's Musk, but no real evidence to support the claim. And there's also evidence that Adrian and Elon have been in the same spaces several times, but they're not the same person. A year ago, Adrian had 20K followers, and he was actively encouraging his audience to engage with his posts and try to get Musk into his live rooms. If you really believe Adrian is Elon, you're probably not looking closely enough at the facts. The whole idea that they're the same person falls apart as soon as you take a deeper look. So basically, it would only appear that Adrian was Elon if you look at his tweets from the last year. If you look at his tweets or live rooms from before that, he was constantly begging to try to get Elon to retweet him or to dip into his live rooms, which is not something Elon pretending to be Elon would do, especially further back in the ruse. He wouldn't get better at the ruse. He wouldn't get worse at the ruse as time went on. He'd get better at the ruse as time went on, right? You know,
one would expect, unless one becomes increasingly unhinged, like some sock puppeteers have.
Right, but to me, this like Elon wouldn't do that. Like if he was going to create a sock puppet, he wouldn't also create a back trail where he has rooms where the sock puppet is pathetically begging to try to get people to get Elon to retweet him. Or
this sounds like just a fan of Elon Musk. So what's the point? What does this fan have to do with H1B?
It is widely believed on the left that this fan is actually Elon Musk, and it's dumb as hell. Like it goes to show like just how far the left will delude themselves to believe anything that fits their narrative. And if you're only consuming media from left-wing spaces, you may have assumed that there was actual evidence that this guy is Elon instead of evidence to the direct contrary. And when they're like, no, here's proof, he uses similar language. Yeah, but somebody who realized they could get followers by pretending to be Elon would use similar language. Oh, he always supports Elon. Yeah, somebody who's trying to pretend to be an Elon sock puppet would always support Elon.
And I note here, if you want to do a little bit of digging on this, all of the evidence that Adrian Ditterman is an Elon sock puppet comes from things that have been posted by Adrian Ditterman, not things that have been posted by Elon. So people are like, oh, sometimes he messes up and speaks in the first person. Yes, if somebody was trying to convince you they were Elon, they would do that. Sometimes he uses language or wording similar to Elon. Yes, if somebody was trying to convince you he was Elon, he would do that. Like, the inability to use common sense on the left is just beyond me at this point. You would need evidence from the other side, the harder to fake side, the side without benefit to faking side, if you're going to make this claim, of which they have literally none.
Like, how can you not see this? There's no motivation for someone to pretend to be an Elon sock puppet. Oh, yes, that's exactly the sort of thing a crazy, unhinged person on the internet would do. Right? So anyway, back to the topic at hand here. So who's on each side? Elon, obviously one of the key champions on the H1B program. If so is Vivek Ramaswamy, and Donald Trump has recently, it said, quote unquote, he always liked the visas. If you're running companies, you're always going to be handling this. So one side of the battlefield, you've got Elon, you've got Vivek, and you've got Donald Trump. So if you're not familiar with Elon and Vivek, they are both entrepreneurs. They are both people who have run companies. They are not like generic populists playing to racial anxieties like some of Wave 1 MAGA.
Elon Musk is an immigrant from South Africa. So
right. I think he came over on an H1B visa. I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't know. He came via Canada because he first went to university in Canada. So I don't know the whole process. But then, he went to university in the US too. So I'm not sure exactly what the immigration status was. But for sure, I mean, he is a highly skilled person who immigrated to the United States and significantly contributed to the United States well-being. So,
Yep. And then on the anti side, you have Laura Loomer and Steve Bannon. Right, like these are people who
have done such great things for our
right. No, but these aren't, Steve Bannon might be like technically a business person, but he is first and foremost like a populist messenger,
right?
And he is not somebody who's had to build giant companies like Vivek or Elon have built, or who's regularly having to hire top engineering talent and would understand why this is necessary. Now, for the accusations that you see a lot on the comments around this is just being used by Indians to hire other Indians. There is evidence for this in terms of lawsuits. So Cognizant, a U.S. jury found Cognizant's employment practices constituted discriminatory conduct towards non-Indian workers. Approximately 75% of their workforce was South Asian. And only about 12% came from the U.S. And they were using the HBV process. So here's the problem, right? You can look at an entire company that's doing this. Would you be able to catch a department at Microsoft that was doing this? Would you be able to catch a department at Google that was doing this? No. And that's what people are saying is happening, right? So we know that this is happening when Indians are running companies. Like, is it happening when they're running departments? And when you consider the number of Fortune 500 companies in the US that are run by Indians, which is hugely disproportionate, I can see why tech workers would be stressing about this. Then there was the Tata Consultancy Services in the United States. So they fired Americans on short notice and replaced them with Indian workers on H1B visas, and they were sued for illegal discrimination here. Then you have Infosys, paid a record $34 million to settle allegations about this, just for the scale of the fraud here, circumventing H1B visa requirements to unlawfully using B1 visa holders to perform skilled labor, violating U.S. immigration laws to increase profits, and an unfair advantage over competitors. And so that's the gist of the information here. So now that you've heard, what was it that you read that gave you a thought on this?
Yeah. So before reading this article, I was like, categorically, we benefit from bringing in more skilled immigration. Why? One, we need, from a demographic collapse standpoint, more high taxpayers. So people who are coming in and making a lot of money are going to hold up the social services for those less fortunate. And we really need that. We really need people to come in and pay for things. So there's that. And in general, it seems like a good idea to bring in talent and keep the talent that we invest money in through our universities to educate, right? If we have the good schools, shouldn't we keep the good talent that we help to cultivate? So then I read Aporia's article titled "Increasing Skilled Immigration is a Mistake." The gist of the article is that they argue that large portion of skilled immigration is Asian, and that Asian immigrants are far more likely to undermine the underpinnings that make America successful, like freedom of speech and small government. So the arguments that they make are that, for example, and I'm quoting from the article, Asian Americans are an extremely left-wing group, so much so that despite their economic success, Asians are much more pro-government intervention than whites and are closer to Blacks or Hispanics, who have much more to gain from redistribution. For instance, a supermajority of Asians, 66%, believe that the government should do more to solve problems compared to only 44% of whites. Similarly, a supermajority, 70%, of Asians say government regulation is necessary to protect the public interest compared to only 53% of whites. And then when asked explicitly, Asians are much more pro-socialist. 49% have a positive impression of socialism compared to only 31% of whites. They also argue that Asians are 12 points more likely than whites to favor censorship. And while it's impossible to say that, this would be super powerful immediately in changing the shape of the United States, if we have significant immigration from specifically Asian cultures, it could shift the culture of the United States if there isn't really strong assimilation. They also point out that the United States, in comparison with, we'll say, non-US Anglosphere countries, which have had much more open to high-skilled immigration policies historically, they note that, quote, the comparison with the non-US Anglosphere is particularly instructive because these countries are very similar to the United States culturally, genetically, and institutionally. Britain, Australia, and Canada have all grown more slowly than the United States since the 2008 financial crisis, and all three have embraced a policy of enormous amounts, far more per capita than the United States, of skilled legal immigration, particularly from China and South Asia. All three have been relatively stagnant personal incomes and skyrocketing housing prices. One might object on the grounds of that immigration to Canada, Australia, and Britain isn't really skilled, but this is what skilled immigration looks like when refracted through government bureaucracies. We should treat these countries as a cautionary tale. We would very easily end up in their shoes. And then I would add to that after reading this article, I hear news about how Canada is undergoing an intense housing pricing crisis, and the government is kind of in turmoil now because no one can afford housing. And what happened was, especially when it came to people being able to get work permits and better immigration status by attending some kind of university in Canada, that basically diploma mills started rolling out diplomas to immigrants who then got to stay in Canada and who have just kind of messed up the job market, and they've messed up the housing market. And while Americans largely agree that immigrants are taking jobs that Americans don't want, I would also argue that Americans are going to have to start taking jobs that Americans don't want because the jobs that they do want are disappearing because of AI. So these are my general hesitations. I think that there are ways to navigate around that. I think you'd alluded to
really hard on this particular hesitation.
Okay.
So I think if they, and I like Aporia, but I think that they do have certain biases
absolutely.
around certain HBD stuff. And I think that if they wanted to convince me, they would have run the statistics by South Asian immigrants, because that's who's using the H1B visa, and the political opinions of, am I surprised that, like Chinese or like Japanese or Korean people might be majority Democrat? Yeah. I mean, like a lot of smart Asians I know are like Democrat, like weirdly. And I'm like, but you see they're the bad guys. And they're like, yeah, but whatever, the system. I have not seen the same with my South Asian friends. Indians, in fact, and I have argued this in a previous episode, might end up being the core of the leadership of a future Republican Party in this country. And we're already seeing this with the new right, whether it's Vivek or Chamath or like they just come off as much better aligned with the right than, and I mean, we even see this in the influencer space, even in like the HBD, like even in their own influencer space, you've got like Razib Khan, you got, I don't know if and I will look up afterwards for statistics on this after the show.
So Indians as a voting bloc have been moving rapidly to the right recently. In 2020, 56% of American Indians identified as Democrats, while in 2024, this number had dropped to 47%. However, one poll found that 61% intended to vote for Kamala, while only 32% intended to vote for Trump.
But I actually expect that the right is going to pick up a lot of Indians. And it just seems pretty natural to me, given that they're pretty based on a lot of this. There's ethnic differences between people stuff, and we want to protect the country.
Yeah, even when it comes to like CRISPR human editing, there are
Oh yeah, they are the most pro
Overwhelmingly.
genetically editing humans culture. They're the only culture where the majority of people are like, yeah, it's like 80% or something, like in India. But there's the secondary effect here, which I want to consider, which is a lot of people are like, yeah, but what about the nepotism networks? And I'm like, look, the nepotism networks are real, but then you also have the cultural differences issue. And as we point out, there are cultural differences between people. It's just,
Yeah.
and maybe ethnic differences as well. I mean, what's the point of diversity if we're not different, right? And India as a culture creates, now the first thing I'd note is we are draining India right now. So if you look at the Indians who come to America, they are disproportionately Brahmin caste, which is the vast minority of Indians in India.
To be more specific, 80% of Hindi Indian Americans identify as one of the upper castes. And of those who are Brahmins specifically, 25% of American immigrants are Brahmins. This contrasts with them making up just 5% of India's population.
And these are people who are genetically quite distant from the other castes in India, to the extent where Aporia did a good piece on this. There is as much difference between a Brahmin and like another caste in India as there is between somebody in northern Germany and Greece in Europe. And if you know the difference between the German people and the Greek people, it is severe. You could not just replace a German person with a Greek person and average. And you know, I just say there's a reason there's not a lot of heavy manufacturing in Greece. Now, the point here being is that we are getting a cream of the crop from India that has been selected as the cream of the crop over like literally their entire history of this caste system, where they had this like intellectual caste, which is who the Brahmins are. So we're not getting normal quote unquote Indians. We are getting elite Indians, which are more genetically distant from normals than people from other countries would be, is going to be very damaging to India's future prospects. And then, well, and it's not just that. We also get like the other like elite Indian groups at higher rates, like the Jains and the Indian Christians and the, by the way, India's had Christians for like ever, if you didn't know this.
Really? No, I did not know that.
Yeah, India's had Christians, I think, from within like 300 years of Christ's life. They've had a Christian community.
Goodness gracious. Okay, all right.
Which obviously leads to like a differentiated genetically community, because they're basically considered religious weirdos for a long time, right? You know, like the same way the Jains would be, or in the same way the Parsi would be, who we often talk about, who we also disproportionately would get as immigrants. I don't think we get disproportionate Parsis actually, because they have to live in weird like housing stuff. But anyway, and I'm assuming we get a disproportionate number of Jain immigrants given the number of Jains I know versus the percent of the Indian population there. So, and all these groups that we're mentioning are groups that do disproportionately economically well in India. So we are draining India of its talent. They're coming to the US. Many of them aren't having kids. You know, it's not like they're gonna replace us or anything. You know, it's just a drain on global economic talent for some minor economic benefit to the United States, which, you know, being a pro-American nationalist, I'm pro that. It would be cool if we could create self-sustaining Indian communities here, but like, who knows if that's a possibility.
A note here, Indians have a fertility rate of 1.47 children per woman as of 2022. So well below the American average and well below replacement rate.
But then it's the cultural differences between this group of Indians, the group I've seen in the United States and other people, is when people tell me like, can you believe this portion of Fortune 500 companies are run by Indians? Can you believe that, what is it now? It's Google is run by an Indian.
Microsoft is run by an Indian. IBM is run by an Indian. Adobe is run by an Indian. YouTube is run by an Indian.
Like all of them are run by Indians now.
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Like, I mean, in the tech space, there's just a really heavy Indian representation.
Yeah. And it's that I would say that Indians have a unique talent, like the cultural differences that are represented in this group of Indians that we are getting as H1B visa holders, as they're sort of like a perfect culture for engaging with and outcompeting within large bureaucracies. They are just hyper good at it. And like, I also kind of get it. Okay, Simone, for example, obviously we've never done this form of discrimination. The vast majority of people who work for us are Latin American. That's the culture we work most with. But let's just say you had a technology company, right? And it was a big one. Lots of people were working at it. And you had to choose.
Are you trying to get us sued?
Okay, I won't say this. I'm just saying that, like, the point is that Indian culture leads to them questioning orders less or trying their own ideas without your approval less in ways that can lead to things falling apart.
Mm.
They are less likely to, as I've seen, waste time on personal recreation in the office and stuff like that. They well, no, it's just like I get why when Elon's like, look, I cannot find competent lead engineers trained in the United States, and I'm looking to India for that from a cultural perspective. I sort of get where he's coming from. If you're looking for steady iterative improvement without risk of like a controversy or without risk of keep in mind how frequently do you hear of some like Indian head of a company, right, getting in trouble for a hooker party or harassing one of his staff or sleeping with an underage intern or like never. Like, well, not never. Like, obviously, it happens, but I'm just
Well,
saying.
can you think of a single example of one happening though?
Instance of one of that happening. No,
I can't either. Whoops. Well, yeah. Okay.
yeah, whoops, right? Like this creates a problem, right?
But
like
I would say so. In response to the Aporia article, you're just arguing that basically they are fudging with the samples here, basically trying to fob off East Asians as like South Asians as well, and that really most of the H1B visa, like the evidence you already have, like you stated, that the 70-something% number being South Asians.
Yeah, and
it's just
I'd
a
even
different
say,
group.
like,
So you can't just be like, well, Asians are generally more in favor of big government and socialism and censorship, when in the end you need to, like, if we're really going to have this conversation, we need to pull specific numbers about South Asians.
yes,
And this
and I'd
nullifies
also,
their argument.
Note here, it doesn't nullify their argument, as I made a point in the ad earlier, is that they are right, and the majority of South Asians are voting Democratic even still. While they are moving to the right, if we were trying to just bring in people who we felt would vote for our side, then we should stop bringing in South Asians. I think that ultimately, with these groups, we're just causing more harm to ourselves by putting in immigration bans. Anything that hurts our AI companies right now, or our space travel companies right now, our drone companies, these are the things that are going to lead us to have global hegemony in the future. The people who win these particular battles now are going to win the game. I mean, after World War II, we took a bunch of Nazi engineers to, build the space program and a lot of the technology that our world runs off of right now, and that helped make us so rich. And people could say, like, yeah, but they had all these bad views and they had all this bad politics. And I'm like, yeah, but they were damn good engineers. The AI race right now is the Manhattan Project of our era. And the country who wins it basically wins the civilizational game as far as any good predictive powers we have right now. It makes sense that we're doing whatever we can to get cheap, high-quality talent, even if it comes at a cost. And I do admit it does come at a cost.
Note here, if you talk about them like destroying American culture or something like that, Indians are the least destructive, like even less than the Jews. I'm like, the Jews don't try to convert you. Like, why are you messing with them? They're not trying to like influence you with their culture, but they often end up running like big media stuff and things like that. It intrinsically leads their culture to trickle down into society. And they often end up being like well-known intellectuals who people listen to. Indians, it's almost the opposite. Like your kids are not at risk of being converted into like Hindu or Sikh or any of those cultures coming out of India. And
Yeah,
like,
there's for sure no evangelization that I see happening.
very little.
There's also very little exclusion. Most of the big Indian weddings that I've been seeing friends posting photos of, for example, are mixed between, one American and one Indian. So,
well, in our neighborhood, people might not know this, but for where we live in like rural US, and this is something that a lot of people who grew up in cities don't know, this is my read. I don't know if it's true, but it's my read, is that Indians actually primarily do not immigrate to inner city America in the same way a lot of other immigrants do. When people are like, oh, I live in an inner city, so I'm in such a diverse area. I'm like, well, I mean, only a few ethnicities actually tolerate American inner cities. And many pretty much exclusively immigrate to American suburbs and exurbs. Indians and South Asians are one of the groups that pretty much primarily immigrates to exurbs. And so our town that we live in is majority for our age range South Asian.
Yeah.
They're either Indian or Pakistani. I haven't asked yet because you don't want to get that one wrong. And I can't
That's
tell the difference.
true.
And I remember in an episode.
Well, if they were more Pakistani, we would probably see more Islamic style veiling among women, and we do.
Oh yeah, we've
not.
seen absolutely none of that. Yeah, they must
so
be.
I would say that they're primarily Indian, if I had to guess.
Yeah, but when we moved here, we considered that like a huge bonus.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, we can get the Indian grocery store that is literally walking distance from our house, where we can get like directly imported spices and foods. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, and all these Indian. Oh, we use them in cooking all the time. I love it.
Mm.
But it's
we
not
need to
just
make
that.
we need to make sag paneer soon. I think.
It's not just that. It's that culturally speaking, if I'm like, how do I know that my kids are going to grow up safe? If they're hanging out with a bunch of Indian friends, I'm not worried about them. I'm not worried about them.
Yeah. Just this morning, you were on this big kick of like, oh my God, like what if our children's best friends come out as Therians, and then what are we gonna do? And yeah, well, we just have to hope that their best friends are.
Their daughter comes out of a Therian. That's somebody who thinks that they're an animal, technically, like a trans person thinks they're the other gender. That first generation Indian parent is going to be like, "What the fuck are you talking about? You're not a cat. Like, grow up and study." But what I'm saying is that culturally speaking, am I afraid of them like tainting the United States in some way? Like, absolutely not. In fact, I feel much safer with my kids. Like if they brought home, let's put it this way. If they brought home like white friends, right? I'd be like, and they're like, oh, I want to go to their house. I'm like, I actually need to like investigate the parents.
Yeah, we need to check them out. We need to call their parents, maybe visit with them the first time.
Yeah, make sure they're not going to be, trying to indoctrinate my kid with like ridiculous ideas. Right. If this kid is obviously like second generation, like their parents are first generation Indians, I'm not vetting that. I'm like, yeah, fuck, go.
You
like,
go.
Whatever. I am no risk. Of them picking up bad habits from that.
Well, you're just gonna want the parents to like it. We'd probably send them over with eggs from our coop or something. Like,
yeah. I mean, I'd be nice about it, but like what I'm saying is, I wouldn't have any fears at all, and that might be. I mean, this is the thing. Like they say that, like I guess that's a racist position for me to be like, look, if they look like they're first generation immigrants from India, I'm pretty sure they're not woke or insane like that. A lot of people might be like, that's a really offensive thing, but it's freaking true, especially if they're in an Indian community like the community in our neighborhood. So then I guess I'm just not afraid of the cultural damage that could be done by these groups. I am okay with the ones who want to keep their culture. I'm okay with the ones who want to join our culture. Like either way, it's fine. Like it's not like a destructive culture. There are cultures I think that are destructive, right? But I just the Indian Brahmins who are coming over, it's not a culture that like I would be particularly worried about damaging the United States.
Now people will be like, what, you really have no problem with the fact that 73% of people coming in the H1B visa are Indian, approximately 13% are Chinese, but when you look at, countries like Canada, it's 1%. If you look at the United Kingdom, it's 0.5 to 6%, France 0.4%, Germany 0.3%, Italy 0.3%, Spain 0.3%. Like, don't you want more German immigrants? Don't you want more Canadian immigrants? And here I'm like, well, I mean... So there's sort of two factors here, right? Like, is there a threat that we're bringing in a bunch of people who are going to replace us? No, because Indians and Chinese have a much lower birth rate than native-born Americans. So we're bringing in a population we're essentially mimetically burning off within a generation or two. But then two, I think people have in their heads that Germans are, I don't know, like something that they aren't. Germans and Canadians are like infected with the woke mind virus much more than people in the United States. Look at what they've done to their own countries. Do we want to be importing them into our country? Like, Indians are fairly based from most of the interactions I have with them. Germans, on the other hand, Canadians, on the other hand, like, I think that people have this perception that they're importing, like, it's like we're in a zombie plague right now.
I told you this new one's terrible. There's no cure.
Oh, not Sophie, man, not Sophie. We can't kill Sophie.
We must check our privilege to dismantle the heteronormative patriarchy's systemic pattern of oppression.
Okay, let's kill her.
Now, with this mind virus, and we're in this fortification, and we've been letting in survivors, and then the guy next to me is like, hey, not enough of the survivors are white, and white's gotta stick with white, so can we let some of those guys in? And I'm like, those guys are clearly zombies. I understand they're white, but the walk, the groaning, the I eat brains. Can we maybe, forget about ethnocentrism for a minute here and just admit that, Germany and Canada are already lost?
Guys, is Bob okay?
Smash capitalism! Eat the rich! If you're white, you're the problem! You're oppressing me.
Hot Hudson.
You are defined entirely by your intersectional identity groups and can be classified as good or evil based on your race, your gender, and your social class, etc.
And I'd also point out here that more Indians are coming in on this program and more Chinese people are coming in on this program because they're applying to companies in the US to move here, and these companies are hiring them to move here at a rate much higher than Germans or British people are doing that. It's not like the system itself is rigged outside of the ethno-nepotism that exists among Indians and Chinese, right? The problem that I, and pretty much the entire New Right has with unchecked immigration, is that these people are coming in and they are not contributing tax dollars. They are not contributing to our economy. The government's giving them free, money, basically, and it's just unsustainable. You cannot have, as I've mentioned many times, a country cannot survive with both porous borders and substantial social services, because if you have both, then you are going to disproportionately attract the people who want to live off of those social services, which are the least productive people, until you can no longer afford to offer those services because they just keep coming in until the osmosis, basically.
Now, here's my question for you, because this is where I do have some consternation.
Okay.
What about the Indian manager at Google who's just hiring all Indians? Do we need to have better laws about this? Do we need to have...
This is hard because cultural fit and also team cohesion, it just works better when people are on the same level with culture. It's going to work better together. Oh God, but now I'm talking about segregation. But if I want a team to work together optimally, I can't. Imposing affirmative action on someone it's going to compromise the potential efficiency of their team. And if they want to be able to work seamlessly with people and not have to spend a ton of time on communication and handholding and making sure everyone's on the same page, hiring people, and this is for exactly the same reason why we're so in favor of people hiring their cousins or childhood friends at our own business or siblings.
Yeah, that's what we do at our business. We're a majority Latin American business that we operate.
And a bunch of our newest hires have been existing team members, siblings, cousins, extended family, etc. And that is because they work seamlessly together, and there isn't this huge investment in training.
And there isn't a fight over stuff. So if you're talking sales commissions and stuff like that, if everyone's related to each other, then they don't care because they're all sending the money back to the same people.
Yeah, it's a different thing. So I don't like intervention in any case, sort of being
what you would say is that the problem here isn't that the Indians are being ethnically selective in their hiring practices. It's that whites should be more ethnically selective in their hiring practices to even it out. Because
no, because I think that in many cases, we, for example, don't hire
whites ever, really. I mean, not on purpose.
Well, I guess you could say like European people of direct European descent. Just so many people that are Latin America or Italians, they're from Europe. I just it's weird saying whites, but yeah, just people from we're not hiring people who are culturally similar to us in many cases for our own companies, because we don't think that people who are culturally similar to us are maybe the best people to do specific roles that we're hiring for. I think we just have to be, I don't know, can we just do a don't be a dick about it rule? Be reasonable. don't be crazy and make your own way. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you can.
I get, yeah, it's screwed. Like, it's screwed up that a bunch of, well, but here's the thing is I imagine what happened was a lot of these white people who were laid off, and then a bunch of Indian H1B visa people were hired, was because the white people just cost a lot less. When you have companies that are meant to maximize shareholder value, well, oh, can you be so angry that they're trying to maximize shareholder value by getting rid of more expensive people? I just feel like letting market forces play out is something you have to do if companies are designed to maximize shareholder value. And if you have such a big problem with that, well, maybe you don't build your entire society around that.
Well, but I disagree. I genuinely do think that there is racism in how some Indians hire. I think
Okay.
that, especially in the tech industry, and I understand why some people are mad about this.
Well, I mean, but is
But
it
I don't.
racism or is it comfort working with people like you?
That's racism. Simone, you're saying, like, is it racism that X person never hires any black people, or is it comfort in working with people like him? Like, that's racism, okay? Call it
Yeah.
what you want, but discomfort with people of different ethnic groups is racism. Now, what you're arguing is that maybe it doesn't need to be malicious, but it is malicious if it's leading to differential hiring practices. If it was a white person not hiring non-white people, you would see this as.
I know. I really don't like the idea of telling people how to run their businesses.
Yeah, no. This is where I'd say
I would hate the idea of someone being like, you've been hiring too many Latin American people for your company, Simone and Malcolm.
no, I agree. We would get in so much if you could get in trouble for hiring too many gay people or Latin Americans, our company would be in so much shit. People would be like, you have a really weird number of gay Latin Americans at your company. And I'm like, well, we're a travel agency. They're good at this. And they're like, that sounds like a stereotype. I'm like, because it's fucking true, you knob. Like there's a reason. But what I would say, Simone,
Yeah.
is my sort of summary on this. If you were wondering, like, I get the concern. I am not saying that this is an issue where it's black and white and there's no concerns. But if I was going to come down on would I want America cutting back on or restricting H1B visas? No, I think that will hurt us economically. I think that hurts us from a national security perspective. I think that hurts us geopolitically. I think that makes our country weaker. Like, across the board, there are negatives to H1B visas.
Yeah, in the face of demographic collapse, beggars can't be choosers too.
On the net, it's a benefit. And because it's a benefit on the net, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
And I am actually really glad to see that it looks like Trump's administration is moving in this direction.
Yeah.
And we told you guys, like, before the election, if people were like, oh, like, are these guys really like the number one, like, new right podcasters? I think we kind of are. Maybe All In could be considered like solidly new right. And
Very. Yeah. And they're very big.
But you're the biggest new right female, which I always point out to her. You are literally the biggest new right female talking head. And we told you guys before this election, we're like, new right is for skilled immigration. Like, unmitigatedly for skilled immigration. And I think a lot of people, they thought maybe like this wouldn't end up in policy, or like we were bluffing, or like we're shitting you. And I'm like, no, like this is what we believe. Also, funny, one of the guys who we're friends with at the Heritage Foundation, who wrote a lot of the spooky stuff that scared progressives about the like birth control and life begins at conception and all of that. So all of you righties who are like, oh, wait, we got to be careful about the people who are like, life begins at conception, and like we got to stop abortions at all levels, and that stuff in the Heritage Foundation's report was written by an Indian. So you know who runs, by the way, American Moment, right? Like, if you don't know who they are, they're seen as like this far right organization that trains a lot of the staffers, the low level staffers who go into the Trump administration and stuff like that. They are very far right of people like us, to the extent where one of the other high level people in the organization regularly teases us about being fake Christians or like the dangerous elements. Their head guy, Indian. I think the founder, Indian. Across the conservative sphere, many of the people pushing for the most hard right line, I'd say like legacy GOP ideas and GOP like what people would think of as like ultra Christian hardline ideas, are Indians. because Indians really like order, I guess I'd say. And they like these sorts of ideas as they apply to that. So I also say that I think a lot of people who are like, oh, we don't want Indians ending up running our party. It's like they already do. Okay. And they're pushing against the weird stuff that you think that we're doing because we're the weird rebel type, right? The weird Appalachian, let's do something new type. They're the let's keep things the way they are, let's keep the ship afloat type. And it's good that we have people of both ilks in the
You need
movement.
both. They moderate each other.
Mm-hmm. But I think that a lot of people miss like because the Indians don't like to, at least generically from what I've seen, take a public stage in stuff or like really piss people off publicly or troll publicly. They don't realize that a lot of the orgs that are pushing for the agenda that they want are run by Indian immigrants.
Fair point. Yeah.
Anyway,
That makes
love
me
you to dust.
This is great. Good. All right. All in. I'm for it now. Made me much more comfortable with this. I do want to keep America innovative and, protective of free speech, but I also think that
They're not having kids. Like intergenerationally, it's not even
it's not in favor of those things, doesn't really have the hope necessary to maintain above repopulation fertility. So great points, and that should have us covered.
yeah. And speaking of, like, they're like, what do engineers help us do? Well, they help us do SpaceX. They help us develop AI. They help us develop better semiconductors. They like all the shit you need is what they're helping with.
Pretty important.
All right, love you.
Do not forget to register for NatalCon. It is in March. It's coming up, and you can get 10% off your registration by entering the code Collins before you check out.
Stop. Are you flattening it out? Good job. You're doing great, butterfly girl. Oh, wow. Wow, you guys have flattened it so well. Is there any air left? Oh, there you go. Stop. Oh.